The final book, written by Glocht, the exploration record of magic, was completed in a small hut. He had shut himself away to focus on what he knew would be his last work, with only Lucy by his side. She floated lazily next to him, listening as he shared words of wisdom while his pen moved across the pages. He told her that no matter how powerful she became, she must never stop learning. She needed to remain humble and use her gifts to help others. He warned her that with great power would come loneliness, but before he said more, he stopped himself and asked her to make a promise. She was never to kill anyone, not even indirectly, and she must go to Sylvania Academy and carry out her duties as a student. In the present, Lucy faced the mercenaries as she unleashed her power. Even as veteran fighters who had seen death countless times, they trembled before her. They recognised the kind of danger that meant certain death, and none dared to move. Lucy stepped toward Elta, her movements carrying raw magical pressure. The men stood frozen in fear, but Elta shouted at them, demanding to know what was wrong. One inexperienced mercenary, unable to sense the overwhelming danger like the others, gritted his teeth and lunged at her with his sword. Lucy flicked her finger, and the sheer physical force of her condensed magic sent him flying, crashing into the distance as the rest of the mercenaries looked on in horror. She walked up to Elta and remarked that he must be the leader. Then, raising her hand as if to flick him aside the same way, she said she supposed she would have to deal with him too. Elta dropped to the ground in fear, but before she could act, Ed walked up behind Lucy and placed a hand on her shoulder, telling her that was enough. A distant rumble followed. Purple lightning split the skies above the academy grounds. Ed glanced upward and noticed the 7 large stars had aligned. This was the moment Glass's plan became possible. Magical towers erupted from the ground surrounding the school. Ed recognised it immediately. This was the scene where the final battle of Act 2 would begin. Everything seemed to be unfolding on schedule, he thought. By now, Taylor should have already defeated the boss in the underground waterways and would soon be facing Glass. Lucy floated past Ed and stared at the rising towers. She recognised them as the 10 Towers of Magic. Longing filled her eyes as she whispered that it might now be possible to resurrect the dead. Normally, Lucy was meant to be asleep during these events, but when she was part of the party, the story changed. Once Glass was cornered, he offered her a proposition. Instead of resurrecting Sylvania, he promised to bring back her student, the Archmage Glocht. Lucy accepts and the party is wiped out. No one ever found a way to defeat her. As Ed remembered this, Elta seized his chance. He grabbed the scroll and activated it, shouting to his men that no one could use magic now. They needed to attack. One mercenary rushed at Ed, sword raised, but Ed cast Windblade and sent him tumbling back. Elta's eyes went wide. He demanded to know how Ed had used a spell. Looking up at Lucy, he realised the truth as Ed explained that even a legendary spell like that had its limits. It was draining Lucy's magic, but she had so much that it was like trying to empty an ocean. The seal simply couldn't keep up. The spell shattered. Lucy hovered above them, staring down at Elta. She told him to get out of her way. She had somewhere to be. Elta collapsed to his knees. Every instinct screamed that his life was about to end. Lucy raised her hand, ready to flick him aside. But Ed stepped between them, warning her that if she did, she might kill him. Lucy froze, her master's words echoing in her mind, never kill. She hesitated as Ed met her eyes, his expression heavy with concern. Then she floated away. Ed asked where she was going. Lucy answered that his favour was over, and she had somewhere else to be. Knowing what she intended, he asked if she was certain she would not regret it. She paused in mid-air, thinking back to Glock's final moments. After a long silence, she answered no, then she flew off toward the towers. A little later, Yenneker had helped evacuate the staff from the island, while Lortel captured Elta and tied him up inside. Making his way upstairs, Ed thought that between the two of them, they should be able to handle the rest. His path led him back to Trix Hall, the very place where everything had begun. He hadn't expected to return here, but there was someone he needed to see. The Glocked Foundation had been the reason he was able to pay his tuition. Glocked had left all his wealth to Sylvania to support students in need, and even now, traces of him could be found throughout the academy. Ed climbed to the roof and found Lucy there, sitting in silence. It hadn't been hard to guess. This was the place where the entire academy could be seen at a glance. To Lucy, the academy itself was a memento of Glocked. Ed approached Lucy, who sat staring into the distance at the towers. She asked him if he had any jerky. He told her no. He asked what she was doing sitting there. Lucy said she was feeling nostalgic, then tapped the ledge beside her, gesturing for him to sit. She explained that something very sad had happened to her long ago. She had cried and cried, but eventually the tears stopped. Ed sat down next to her and asked why. She answered that there was no real reason, only that time had passed. Current events had reopened old wounds. She had thought about bringing her master back, but in the end, she realised that even if she did, she would only have to say goodbye again. He had been ready to pass on, and he had made all the preparations he needed. Bringing him back would probably make him angry. Lucy admitted she knew it was selfish, but she didn't care. Ed asked if she was all right. She spoke his name softly. Ed sighed, expecting her to ask for more jerky. But instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder, asking to borrow it. At that moment, he realised why she had gestured for him to sit beside her. She simply needed a shoulder to cry on. They sat together in silence, watching the towers. Despite the situation, the night sky looked beautiful. Meanwhile, Taylor's group was already locked in battle with Glast. A giant mechanical golem stood between them and Ayla, who was trapped within its heart. Glast himself fought the group, wielding magic with relentless force. Zig summoned a powerful wind spell, and massive hands formed from the currents, gripping the golem's arm and holding it back. He shouted for Taylor to reach Ayla. Taylor sprinted forward, leaping onto the restrained arm and racing toward the chest. Glast tried to intercept, but Taylor slashed through him. As his body was struck, Glast's thoughts drifted back. He remembered the countless hours spent in his office, watching the world change beyond his window. The first-year student, Dorothy, who had always come to him, eager to study advanced magic. The young assistant professor, constantly getting into trouble and offering apologies. The senior colleague who often joined him for tea, still visiting even after becoming headmaster. Through it all, he had buried himself in research, using it to smother the grief of losing his daughter. With a surge of power, Glast hurled Taylor back, then called upon celestial magic to rewind his wound, undoing the cut. His mind lingered on the past. No matter what he accomplished, those painful memories of loss never faded. Determined, he began casting a massive time prison, and the chamber warped with its power. At the last moment, Zig shoved Taylor clear, sacrificing himself. A heartbeat later, Ziggs, Elvira, and Adele were caught in the field, their bodies freezing in place. Taylor charged forward. Glast warned him not to stand in his way, as the golem began charging a devastating beam at him. Before it could fire, Taylor unleashed his swordmaster skill, slicing the golem into pieces. Glast rewound time again, repairing the machine with celestial magic. He told Taylor it was pointless, that he could never win. But before he could finish, an ice spear struck him from the side. Reversing time had also undone the prison, releasing Ziggs and the others. Zig shouted for Taylor to move. With a powerful strike, Taylor destroyed the golem again and reached Ayla. Glast staggered, realising it was over. Accepting his defeat, he stepped off the tower's edge, plummeting to the ground below. As he fell, a sorrowful look crossed his face, and he whispered that he missed her, his daughter, Muri. Before the ground could claim him, a magic circle opened beneath his body, his fall twisted into light, and he vanished. Far away in the woods, Glast reappeared, gravely wounded and leaning against a tree. He turned his head and saw Ed standing nearby. Weakly, he asked how Ed had known he would be there. 1 hour earlier, Lortel was making her way to meet Yenneker and Ed after handling the aftermath. She spotted Ed up ahead with Lucy at his side. Lucy clung lightly to his sleeve, and for the first time Lortel sensed she might have another rival. From the waterways, Cleo emerged, supporting Dorothy, who leaned heavily against her shoulder. Both looked shaken and upset. They flinched in fear as Yenneker arrived, leaping down from Tarkan's back. She asked Ed if the towers were made of celestial magic. When he confirmed, she explained that Tarkan had sensed that same kind of magic in the northern forest days earlier. There was only one man who could be responsible. Ed frowned. No magical towers had risen from the forest, so what had Glass been planning there? Just as Elta had returned, it was possible Glass might do the same if left unchecked. Ed decided he needed to investigate. Now, back in the present, Ed stood before Glass, who sat gravely wounded against a tree. Yenneker gasped at the sight of his injuries and asked what he was doing out here. Glass told her he had been looking at the moon, then asked if that sounded ridiculous. She told him it didn't. Ed asked if he had known his plan would fail. Glass chuckled quietly, admitting he had, though he hadn't expected to be stopped by students. Even if they had failed, Principal Obel would have stopped him. Perhaps Obel had even let things go this far because of their friendship. Looking back at Ed, Glass said he was a much better student than he had expected, and he regretted realising that so late. Ed asked why he had kidnapped him. Glass explained that at first it was because of his talent. He had hoped to recruit him into his plan. But when his body collapsed from overwork, that idea had ended. In the end, dying alone seemed a fitting price for all his sins. At least he had never been lonely during the 17 years he had spent with his daughter. Ed asked if she had been 17. Glass nodded. Some might say that was a long time, but to him it had been far too short. Ed crouched down to meet his eyes. He reminded Glass that he hadn't been alone. Professor Cleo had been by his side for years. She had studied under him for 4, then worked as his assistant for 5. They had passed her earlier, and she had been in tears. Even though she often said he was difficult, she also admitted he was the most scholarly man she had ever met. Dorothy too had been grieving. She hadn't understood his plan, but she had remained loyal. He had recognised her talent, and for that she would always be grateful. Ed told Glass he wasn't truly alone. He had unearthed and nurtured many hidden talents over the years. Just as he had believed in his daughter, he had shown faith in countless students, and they had all valued him. For a moment, Glass' weary eyes softened. He realised Ed was right. Despite everything, he hadn't been alone after all. Glass' breath grew weaker. He told Ed that before beginning the ritual, he had seen the state of the Soul Library. He had noticed that Ed had cleaned it out, taking the most valuable formulas. But he pointed out that Ed hadn't taken everything. When Ed asked what he had missed, Glass handed him a small key. The library now belonged to him. Ed asked why he was giving it to him. Glass brushed the question aside, telling him only that beneath the table Raina had been guarding was a hidden safe, and this key would open it. Turning to Lucy, Glass began to speak, urging her to look around her more often. But when he saw the expression on her face, he stopped and remarked that it was a wise decision. No one but Glass knew what her expression had been. A small, peaceful smile crossed his lips as he passed away. The others remained with him for a while, watching in silence. Later, Ed stood in the dean's office as the man reviewed his paperwork. The dean remarked that this was the second major incident Ed had been caught up in. Reading through Ed's written report, he wondered aloud why Ed had been kidnapped, then recited the events. Ed had escaped, encountered Taylor, and been joined by Yenneker and Lortel. Ed confirmed the account was correct. When the dean asked why he had left Ayla behind, Ed explained that she had been afraid of him. She hadn't trusted him, and that was why he had escaped alone. The dean nodded, saying he had heard enough. He admitted he had suspicions about Ed. His composure in these situations was far from ordinary. Leaning forward, he told Ed he wasn't as clueless as he pretended to be. Ed answered lightly, saying the dean was giving him too much credit. The dean slammed the report onto the desk, saying that no matter what, Ed was a victim of the Academy's negligence. Looking down, Ed realised he wasn't reading the incident report at all. It was his report card. The dean told him he had been working very hard, and the academy intended to reward those efforts. A moment later, Ed stepped out of the office. Yenneker greeted him as Ed apologised for always worrying her. Then he asked if she was all right after such a tough fight trying to find him. She smiled and claimed she was fine, but when the bird spirit whispered in her ear, her expression faltered. Admitting she was sore, she rubbed at her back and said she had strained it while saving him. Ed frowned at her words, concern clear in his face as she continued her little act. He told her that she had always been there when he needed her, and he had taken that for granted. After Glass's final moments, he realised it was too late to have regrets once something was lost, and guilt pressed on him for being such a burden. Yenneker began to panic, realising where his words were leading. Ed bowed and said it might be better if she stayed away from him. Flustered, she quickly bowed as well, blurting out that she was sorry and admitting she had lied. She wasn't hurt at all. She begged him to forgive her. Ed then asked if she was still staying in Dex Hall. Starting next semester, he might be there too. Her face lit up instantly, and she beamed with joy, asking excitedly if he truly meant it. Later, Ed made his way back to the cabin, thinking about the dean's words. The dean had told him to end his struggles in the forest, move into Dex Hall, and live as a regular student again. He had earned it. Standing outside the cabin, Ed paused to take in the sight. He looked around the camp, remembering all the work he had put into surviving here. He had planned to improve the camp over the break, but stepping through the door, he murmured that perhaps this marked the end of his life in the woods. Before he could settle into the thought, the roof shook and Lucy came crashing down onto the floor behind him, a startled look of surprise on her face. Lucy wandered through the forest, frowning at the distant mountains. This didn't look like Arcana Island. Then it struck her. She was dreaming of her childhood. She wondered why, but since she was here, she decided she might as well visit the old man. She opened the door and saw him sitting peacefully in golden sunlight streaming through the window. But the warmth bled away as the room twisted, darkening into a nightmare of tattered curtains and cobwebs. Her master turned his head to reveal a skeletal face, demanding to know why she hadn't resurrected him. Lucy sighed, realising it was only a nightmare. She awoke in bed, more annoyed than frightened. A maid greeted her and asked if she would like to get ready for school. Lucy paused, then shot straight out the window at full speed, deciding she felt like visiting the northern forest instead. She dropped onto the roof of Ed's cabin just as he was heading for the door. Seeing him brought an easy smile to her face. Something about him made her feel at ease. But when she heard him murmur that this could be the end of his life in the woods, the shock sent her tumbling from the roof. Ed glanced back, saw her sprawled on the ground and thought cats were difficult to read. They never did what you wanted. When you showed them interest, they seemed indifferent, but the moment you ignored them, they wanted attention. Best to ignore them altogether, he decided, as he went inside, leaving Lucy lying there in shock. He thought back to his monster studies class. Professor Flubin had once explained the same thing, charming the class, especially the female students. After class, the professor asked Ed to see him in his lab and casually inquired if Ed knew about the scholarship system. Ed said yes. It reduced tuition in exchange for working for the academy. Holding a snake with one hand, Flubin told him it could be a great opportunity. Likely Ed would work under Professor Cleo, who was overwhelmed now that Glass was gone. A niece was helping her, but there was still far too much to do before the new students arrived. Ed rubbed his chin. That student should be arriving soon. Elsewhere, Lortel sat in her office, staring at the sealed tome she had just retrieved. She thought about Ed's request, that she purchase it for a favour. He had told her she could do whatever she wanted with it afterward, but she knew he hadn't wanted it to end up in Crepin's hands. Maybe she shouldn't sell it. She scolded herself for worrying about his feelings instead of profit. She needed to be ruthless. But as she looked again at his note, her eyes lingered on the words. Any favour. The sight made her cheeks warm. She tried to shake it off, burying herself in work, wondering who would take the special class during winter break now that Glass was gone. Everyone should be busy, so she told herself she wouldn't have to worry about rivals for now. Yet as she scribbled, she thought of Lucy. The thought made her snap her pen, leaving her unsettled by an ominous feeling. Back at the camp, Lucy lounged outside the cabin with jerky in her mouth, still in her pyjamas. She asked Ed if he had enough firewood and why he hadn't been hunting lately. Ed wondered why she was suddenly asking so many questions. He realised he had been neglecting his chores and thought maybe it was because he was preparing to move to Dex Hall. He suspected he wouldn't see Lucy as much once he left, but maybe that was better for keeping the story stable. Yenneker arrived, running and waving. Ed asked if she was done with classes already, and she said yes, she had come to relax. Sitting down beside him, she explained that since he might be moving to Dex Hall soon, she wanted to spend as much time at the camp as possible. When Yenneker mentioned helping Ed settle into Dex Hall, Lucy glared. Ed wondered what he needed to finish before moving, then looked at the key Glass had given him. He'd need to open the hidden safe soon. Yenneker handed him a letter of invitation to Dex Hall, suggesting he fill it out in advance. When Ed thanked her, she offered to help. But before he could reply, Lucy appeared between them in a flash, arms outstretched to block Yenneker from Ed. She told him to stop. He must not accept the invitation. Days passed. Yenneker taught him spirit elementalism as usual, but often noticed Lucy watching from the trees. Yenneker wondered what she had done to upset her. Later, Ed sat in the cabin with a book, Lucy curled up on his lap as he tried to study. He was beginning to think it was time to learn intermediate magic. But the more he tried, the harder it became, and progress slowed. Wherever he went, Lucy clung to him, her hostility flaring whenever Yenneker appeared. Strangely, she seemed more afraid than angry. As Ed lay in bed struggling with his studies, Lucy asked what his plans were. Ed told her there was a place he wanted to visit. He added that he should gather firewood, since nights were getting colder and he might freeze if he wasn't careful. Of course, he wouldn't have to worry about that if he moved to Dex Hall. Still, he said he should focus on his chores before going anywhere. Lucy looked at him and told him they should go now, together. A little later, Ed lowered himself into the remains of the Soul Library, using a rope tied to a tree to reach the hole Lucy had made. She floated down beside him as he asked why she was so keen on coming with him. Lucy only replied that she could have carried him with her magic, but Ed explained that he needed to make the trip on his own. He planned to return more than once to collect all the magical items hidden inside. He pushed aside the broken table to reveal the safe beneath it. Using the key Glass had given him, he unlocked it. A brilliant light flared from within, flooding the ruined library with radiant energy. When it finally faded, Ed could hardly believe what he saw. Later, Ed tried climbing back out using the rope. The effort left him struggling, and he thought about his plans to meet Lortel soon for more magical engineering supplies. Maybe, while he was at it, he should purchase a ladder from her too. He decided to take a break and stopped to catch his breath. Lucy asked what the item in the safe had been. Ed told her it was the Golden Phoenix ring. It twisted the passage of time, letting the user borrow their future self's magic power in the present. In theory, he could cast advanced magic immediately, but there was a price. Use too much, and he'd be left unable to use magic for some time. It was meant only for extreme situations, a last resort. Still, he wondered aloud what he might achieve with it outside of combat, perhaps even forging a contract with a high-ranking spirit. Lucy asked why Glass would make such a thing. Ed said the reason no longer mattered. The truth was that the item contradicted everything Glass had stood for. All his years of research had been devoted to this ring. It was clear now he had intended it as a gift for his daughter. When Ed finally reached the surface, Lucy spoke up. She told him she once lost a button from her cuff. She hadn't noticed it much while it was there, but once it was gone, her sleeves constantly got in the way. That was when she realised how important it had been. For her, it was often like that, only noticing how important something was after it was gone. As Ed climbed out, breathing hard, he rested against a tree. Lucy admitted she'd come with him for another reason. She wanted to know if he was really going to move to Dex Hall, and asked with sadness in her voice, what if he didn't? Ed paused at her words. He hadn't made up his mind yet. Moving to Dex Hall would make his life easier, especially with winter on the way. Lucy agreed softly, then remarked that rain would be coming soon. Ed thought to himself that Lucy was often good at predicting the weather from the humidity. Though she wasn't always right, he told her it wasn't the season for rain. But then her eyes widened as a single snowflake drifted down. More followed until the air was filled with quiet flakes, and the two of them sat together beneath the first snow of the season. Ed admitted that with everything going on, he hadn't managed to gather enough firewood. He smiled faintly and said he didn't think he could do it alone, asking if she would help. After all, she had been the one to remind him. Lucy rushed at him and hugged him so hard it knocked him over. She asked if he really meant it, her voice bright with relief. Ed groaned from the impact, but told her he had grown used to life at the camp and had even planned improvements. It would probably be better if he stayed. Lucy threw herself at him again with another hug, leaving Ed flat on the ground with a sigh. And so, Act 2 came to an end. Ahead lay Act 3. The battle for the student council presidency between the princess and Lortel would soon begin. More main characters and enemies would arrive at the academy, and the final boss would appear, Lucy Mayriel. Ed knew there would be hardships, but he didn't want to think about them now. He had seen a side of Lucy that none of his playthroughs had ever revealed. A Lucy smiling at him, truly happy. Because of that, he believed they would be fine. Winter arrived, and heavy snow blanketed the camp. It meant more work for Ed, but he promised himself he wouldn't overdo it. He only needed to stay on top of his chores before beginning his duties as a scholarship student the next day. Since he had turned down the offer to move into Dex Hall, the academy had rewarded him with a tuition scholarship, lifting his financial burden. He stepped out of the cabin quietly, Lucy still sleeping on his bed. He no longer bothered to throw her out. With her defensive magic, the cold wouldn't harm her, but now it felt wrong to force her away. The camp was silent, the academy quiet. No major events loomed on the horizon. Holding the golden phoenix ring in his hand, Ed thought this was the perfect time to take a risk. Clenching his fist, he activated it. Magic erupted from him in a surge of light. And he called out to Marilda.